Welcome to Pieces for My Puzzle. I am your host, Nikki Ship, and I'm excited to be sharing with you my life with a son on the spectrum. This podcast is for anyone who is looking for quick tips and perspective, but most of all, for hope and inspiration. So sit back, relax, and let's put the pieces together. Hey everyone, welcome back to Pieces for My Puzzle. My name is Nikki and I am your puzzle master for this episode. Last week we talked about how to find resources and take action when you first have a diagnosis with someone on the spectrum. This week we're going to be discussing IEPs and how to find an advocate to help you, what questions to ask, and how to navigate some of that process a little bit. So IEPs are individual plans that are actually designed within a school district, within a school to help a child with their educational needs. They're a plan that's supposed to be put in place to benefit your child's educational career. To be quite frank with you guys, and anyone who's experienced an IEP, you all know what a pain in the ass they are. But for lack of better words, that will be the nutshell version of a description of an IEP. But navigating them can be extremely difficult. So, there's 4 basic components to an IEP for you to understand and know. And the first one is just to understand the process, to know what an IEP is, and educate yourself on what those components are, how to navigate IEP meetings, and also to be able to monitor and stay up on top of that IEP for your child. Those 4 major components are hugely overwhelming. And like I said, any of you that have experienced an IEP, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So let's start with some of the basics. And I'm going to put my glasses on here because, well, this is just the reality of my situation. But I'm going to go ahead and start with some of the basics on getting the IEP process started. So there's a great organization out there called understood.org. And if you're not familiar with them, please check them out. Once again, that's understood.org. They're a nonprofit full of resources, great tips, and they even have a flow chart in there on how you can how to get an IEP if you don't already have one. And I will post that link in the show notes as well, but I did print a copy of it out here. And for those of you that are listening in, you won't be able to see this, but it is a fantastic flow chart full of what to do if you get a yes or a no on your IEP process. So it's really kind of a great beginner's flow chart, especially when you're trying to obtain an IEP. So the first thing is to understand what's in an IEP. And again, your participation is going to be so critical in the creation of your child's IEP plan for the school. Understood.org has some other articles also in there. So I encourage you to just go in there and navigate what all of these articles are, as well as the flow chart, to get yourself familiar with it. You may or may not feel at first that you need an advocate. And I really felt like I should have had an advocate from the very beginning. But hindsight's 20/20, right? And I brought in an advocate after Drayson already had an existing IEP. As you educate yourself and explore a little bit more about IEPs, I really encourage you to also look at interviewing advocates that you might potentially need. And the reason is, you're going to have a lot of questions. This plan is very catered to your child's needs, and you want to make sure that it's on point with the services that he's getting in the school. And sometimes it can get lost in translation. Sometimes when you follow up, you find out that they may or may not have been providing those services. And sometimes you might think that the goals need to be different, but the team of educators might not think that those goals need to be different. So an advocate is there for you to be a third party to also help navigate that process, but also is there for you to convey your wants and your needs and your wishes for that IEP. So they are there to intend that the special needs are met at all times in the school. So ask, your friends, family, specialists, if they have someone to refer to for an advocate. That's usually the first step, is kind of ask your inner circle, ask your network. The Council of Parent Attorneys and Advocates, which is actually a national organization called COPA, COPAA, which does stand for Council of Parent Attorneys and Advocates. They have a directory, actually a national directory, that's listed on where you can find an advocate. So if you go to copa.org, and that's COPAA.org, you can go ahead and see that list of advocates in there and find someone local in your area. I will also post this link in the show notes for you for your reference, but some of the questions for you to ask an advocate is, how long have they been an advocate? What's their background? Are they familiar with the school district that your child is in? Are they familiar with local policies on special education? Because it does vary depending on what state you're in and where you're at. Policies might be slightly different. And what are their fees? Do they charge by the hour? Do they also charge for travel or mileage? Our advocate actually does charge for mileage. That's why I never knew that, and I wish I would have thought to ask that so I would know. And any other pertinent questions that you think that might be important. I think it's important to understand that you want an advocate that has background, that has experience. Maybe at one time they were even within the school district and now they no longer are. Or maybe they were a special education teacher for years. Do they have any certifications? What's their educational background? Find out how well versed they are in the advocacy. So during an IEP, it's really important to make sure that you are taking notes and document. As I've mentioned in previous, I think in my last podcast in episode 2, I mentioned how important it is to document what you're seeing with your child, especially when you're looking for a diagnosis. It's so important to document. And an IEP is no different. You're probably going to get sick of documenting. But I'm going to encourage you that you just stick with it, because if you ever need it, you'll have it and it'll be well worth it at that point. Record keeping is so important, and we'll talk about that actually in my next upcoming podcast episode about how to stay organized. But I'm going to give you some tips right now during an IEP of some of the things you can do. So once you've obtained the IEP and you may or may not have an advocate in that room with you, here are some quick tips that I recommend that you do during an IEP. So the first one is record the session. Record what's happening, whether it's an audio recording apps. I'm sure they have them on your phone, but make sure that you're recording the session, and that you also have a notepad with you so that you can document everything. Take down your own set of notes. If there's things that you need to get to them, if there's things that you need to send to them, then make sure that you have a notepad so that you can write those things down. If you have any pertinent paperwork, go ahead and bring that with you as well. And like I said, I'll talk a little bit more about that in a future podcast episode coming up on how to stay organized. But write down your questions that you have ahead of time as well. So on that same little notepad, I would write down the questions that you have ahead of time so that you don't forget to ask them before you walk out of that session. That would happen to me so many times. I would walk out of an IEP and go, oh, I forgot to ask them about whatever. And you will have a lot of questions that you will think of, and you'll have even more questions that you're going to think of while you're sitting in that IEP session with the educational team. If possible, try to have mom and dad there. It was so important for me to have my husband in the room. And I think it's also because you guys are a team. It's important that you're on the same page, and it's important that you're hearing everything that's happening in that room. And I also liked having my husband in there because he was also an observer. So in case you haven't noticed, I'm the talker. I know you guys haven't met my husband yet, but I'm definitely the talkative one between the two of us. And it was always interesting to me hearing what his observations were after we left an IEP. So I say you guys are a team. You guys should both be in that room for those IEP reviews, or even for an initial IEP planning, planning appointment. So, and another thing is don't let them rush you through the meeting. A lot of times these IEP appointments are set for, 30 minutes, or we have an hour, or they don't want to exceed a certain time frame. Do not let them rush you in that meeting. If you have continued questions and they are in a rush to get you out of that room, then you request for a reappoint. You request that you want to reappoint and you want to meet with them again because you are not done with all of your questions. So that is kind of the Reader's Digest about IEPs. It's really a very nutshell version. We are going to be addressing even more in depth in future podcast episodes about IEPs, different aspects of them, because it really is quite the tangle web to navigate. So please stay tuned for those upcoming in the future. We are going to be dissecting a little bit more about IEPs, but hopefully this gives you some general information about where to get started, how to navigate the process, and what to do during an IEP, and also questions to ask an advocate. At the end of every episode, we want to do a story highlight for families celebrating their wins with a child on the spectrum. So if you have a story that you would like for us to read, please send us an email at info@piecesformypuzzle.com. Today's story is going to be about my son, Drayson, and how to find valuable moments with your child. It's always difficult at first to try to find ways to connect with your child, and you are going to connect with your child in a way that you might not suspect. So most recently, I was working in my office and Dee was watching, I call Drayson Dee sometimes, so you will hear me refer to him as Dee as well. Dee was watching a movie in the other room, and he independently came into the office, which is rare, but he independently came into the office and he was playing with our 1-year-old puppy. And he just started to kind of hang out in the room, which is unusual for him. He usually doesn't want to hang out or be around what mom's doing, especially when mom's working. But he came in the room and he just really wanted to kind of hang out. No words. He didn't really say anything. And he came in and he was looking through my little pen canister that I have, because I used to have a laser pen that was sitting in there and he couldn't find the laser pen. And I said, well, I'm not sure where the laser pen is right now, but would you like to draw? He said no. And I thought, okay. I said, well, I'll put it here just in case. So I put a piece of paper and some markers there on the desk. And he sat at the desk across from me. I have two desks in my office. He sat at the desk across from me. And he sat there very quietly. And I just acted like I was still continuing to do my work. And he sat there quietly across from me and started to draw, like doodle, like little pictures. And he started to draw happy faces. So I kept working and he sat there for quite a while. And then I noticed he reluctantly picked up the markers that I left there and he started drawing around the happy faces. And for the first time after he did those drawings, we actually had a conversation about what he drew. And I remember it very vividly because it was the first time he actually really shared with me what he was doing in that moment. So I asked him, what did you draw? And he said, happy faces. And I said, do you feel happy? And he said, yes. And I was so happy and elated because I felt like he was trying to communicate to me that he was happy. It wasn't the traditional way I would think to communicate with my son. So I started drawing smiley faces next to his, and I asked him, does mommy look happy? And he said, yes. So I think sometimes giving that perspective is super important. And I think sometimes realizing that that was a big moment for him, but it was a big moment for me too. So since then, we draw little pictures every once in a while. Sometimes he feels like he's drawing a picture and sometimes he doesn't. So we just kind of go with it. So my question to you is, how can you take advantage of making a memorable moment with your child? What is something that's happened that you feel that you were able to communicate with him in a way, or have a conversation with him or her in a way that opened up a perspective that you hadn't seen before with your child? Look for the opportunities, because they are just there. They're right there in front of you. It's just a different point of view. So if you have a story that you would like to share with us, celebrating the wins with your child on the spectrum, please email us at info@piecesformypuzzle.com. I look forward to reading them. This concludes our episode for today. I want to thank all of you for tuning in and listening. Please like and follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel at Pieces for My Puzzle. If you like what you're hearing, please spread the word to others about our podcast, that we're here to provide inspiration and awareness, and also some quick tips. And if you feel like giving us a good rating on your preferred podcast platform that you use, we would love that as well. Until next time, keep working on your puzzle, and remember, you don't have to have it solved all in a day. Take care.